My name is Ashalev, Chapter 11. I was attending the Ladova Yeshiva High School. I asked to see the registrar. He was a short, thin man with a dark beard and bald head. He wore rimless spectacles and a small dark skull cap. He looked up from behind his neat desk. Yes? I did not ask to take French. And? Someone put French on my class card. Yes? I do not want to take French. What do I need with French? He adjusted the spectacles delicately on the bridge of his thin nose. Ashalev, you will take French. You will take 4 years of French, and you will earn for yourself excellent marks in French. The Rebbe specifically requested that we make certain you study in French. I stared at him. Is there anything else? No. Then good day, Ashalev. On Rosh Hashanah, I sat in the synagogue and prayed. The prayer shawls and white garments flooded the synagogue with light. There was white light everywhere. On the chairs and benches, near the podium where the reader chanted the prayers, near the ark where the Rebbe sat praying quietly alone, faintly luminous against the dark wood of the wall. We stood, and the Rebbe sounded the shofar. The sounds filled the large synagogue, and the air vibrating invisibly as the piercing notes caught up with one another and echoed from distant corners. I looked at the bundle of prayers on the podium in front of the Rebbe. Somewhere in those bundles there were prayers for my mother and father, and for Jacob Kahn. I hoped the Rabbono Shel Olam would listen more seriously to my prayers, and for my parents and Jacob Kahn, that he had to my father's prayers for me. On Yom Kippur, I wept when I remembered my father's weeping over the martyrdom of the 10 sages. On Sukkot, I marched in the synagogue procession with lulav and esrog my uncle had purchased for me. On Simchas Torah, I danced with a Torah scroll, and there on the edge of the crowd of thousands that always came to watch our joy on that day was Jacob Kahn. I pulled him into line, and we held the Torah together and danced. His small dark skull cap was as awkward on his head as was the grasp of his fingers upon the Torah, but we held it together and we danced. I continued going to him on Sunday afternoons. I continued painting and drawing, and now I did some sculpting too. I studied Gemara, I studied Hasidus, I studied French. The opening of Jacob Kahn's show took place on a Sunday afternoon in late October. It was a lavish black tie affair with drinks and food. The gallery was crowded. The sculptures had been carefully positioned along the floors and walls, in form and line and texture, in the way they utilized space within and around them. They were clear and awesome indicators of a powerful, visionary aesthetic. He had transformed forever the nature of sculpting, as Picasso had transformed forever the nature of painting. One of the sculptures consisted of 2 heads facing in the same direction. One head was Jacob Kahn's, the other was mine. They were identical to the heads we had sculpted out of wet sand along the edge of the cutting serve. Now they were in bronze. The small red label on the base of the sculpture indicated it had already been purchased. I moved through the gallery, listening. It seemed an intelligent crowd. I heard much talk about Picasso and Cubism and Henry Moore. Most of the painters I had met with over the months in his studio were there. At one point, during the afternoon, I found myself next to Anna Schaefer. She wore a gown and her face was flushed with excitement. "It is a grand success," she cried exuberantly. "You have no idea what I went through to get him to agree to a show. You will not give me such trouble, Ashalev, will you? I could not take such heartache from both of you. Look around. It is a magnificent day." She turned to greet someone and I moved away. I saw Jacob Khan near a wall, dressed in a dark suit and dark bow tie, surrounded by a dense crowd, and looking stiff and uncomfortable. His wife stood behind him, smiling and talking calmly to a woman in diamonds, but looking as if she would rather be reading one of her Russian or French books. Somehow I managed to make my way up to them. Asha, Tanya Khan said, "You are looking fine." "Congratulations," I said. "It is a great show." "Yes?" Jacob Khan said. "You don't think so? I wish I had Picasso's gal and could stay away from these things. They destroy me. A few more of these and I will never make it to 80. "You will make it to 90, Tanya Khan said calmly. "I wish I had that Spaniard's gal. Instead, I have a Jewish heart. I would not want to hurt Anna." "I like the two heads," I said. He looked at me. "Very much." "I like them too," he said. "Who bought them?" He shrugged and would not respond. I moved through the crowd and stood next to Anna Schaefer. "I saw you with Jacob," she said. "Is he suffering terribly?" "He says he is. Poor man. He does this to please me. He wishes he had Picasso's contempt for such things. Yes. How I know that old man." "Who bought the two heads? Which?" I told her. "Ah," she said. "Who bought them?" She told me. I stared at her. She smiled faintly. "They are among his collectors. They have a number of his pieces. It is a beautiful sculpture. He made it when he returned after the summer." She looked at me. "He has developed an affection for you, Ashalev." I did not say anything. When I left the gallery later that afternoon, it was still crowded. On the subway ride home, I thought about the sculpture of the two heads and wondered where they would put it. In a library? In a garden? In a living room? What would the eyes stare at? Ornate drapery? Marble? Books in leather bindings? Rare flowers? It was a queer feeling to know that a likeness of my head would soon be in the home of one of the wealthiest families in America. The reviews of the show were uniformly appreciative and filled with praise. I read in one of the newspapers that the entire show had sold out at the opening. The next time I saw Jacob Khan, I congratulated him on that. He looked bereaved. The weeks went by. I continued traveling to Jacob Khan. The room in which I lived became crowded with drawings and canvases. My uncle came into the room one night early in December. And stood in the doorway watching me work on a painting of my memory of Mrs. Rackover. She had gone to live with a married daughter in Detroit after my mother had left for Europe and had died of a heart attack in downtown Detroit Street in late November while shopping for a gift for a new grandson. He stood in the doorway a long time, watching me paint. And then he cleared his throat softly. "Am I disturbing you?" "No. It is a good painting. Thank you." "Asher, Goldie and I were talking. Look at your room. It is crowded and small. It's a room. We will fix up the attic for you." I stopped painting and looked at him. "It is a whole floor. No one uses it." "We will fix it up and you will have more room." Carpenters came. Painters came. A month later, the whole family, my uncle, my aunt, their 4 children, helped me move upstairs. When it was done, my uncle surveyed the attic, chewed thoughtfully on his cigar, and said, "Now you are a painter. When someone writes the history of Ashalev, he will say his uncle fixed him up with his first real studio. This is a studio. Not the closets you had until now. It will take you 5 years to fill up the studio." I did a painting of him and his family and gave it to them for Hanukkah. He framed it and put it on the wall of the living room. I called it his authentic love. He called it his authentic love, and kept talking about the fortune it would be worth one day. The attic room was large, with a high sloping roof and a tall window that looked out on the oak maple. I could barely see the street through the thick tangle of branches. I worked and slept in that room. I did not think it would take me 5 years to fill it. Between semesters, Jacob Kahn took me by train to a Van Gogh exhibit at the Philadelphia Museum of Art. We talked about the post-impressionists and the Nabis and the Faubs. We talked about Gauguin and Matisse and Vlaminck. We came back in a snowstorm that delayed the train and got us into New York more than 2 hours late. I called my uncle from the station. He answered the telephone, and I heard his voice tremble. He was relieved to hear from me and grateful that I had thought to call. Early in February, Jacob Kahn sent a plaster piece out for casting in bronze. When it came back, I saw it was a sculpture of the two of us dancing with a Torah. I had not seen him sculpt it. He put it in a corner of the studio. One day, I looked for it and it was no longer there. Tanya likes it, he said. I took it home. I asked him once if they had any children. They had a daughter, he said. She died of influenza in Paris at the age of 4. He came to the ladders in Farbringen in the second week of February. We were commemorating the day that the Rebbe's father removed himself from this world. The synagogue was filled with thousands of people. The men sat at the tables. The students took on benches around the walls. There were benches along the area in front of the ark. Elders and guests of honor sat on those benches. I saw 2 Jewish novelists on one of those benches, and I saw Jacob Kahn, thick shoulder, the dark beret covering his white hair. The Rebbe sat on a cushioned chair at a table in front of a microphone. He wore a dark kaftan and an ordinary dark hat. He spoke for a few minutes in Yiddish about the need for a true Torah education for Jewish children. He quoted from the Gemara and the Midrash and the Zohar. The huge crowd was hushed, listening. His words came clearly through the microphone, the same words being translated by telephonic hookup to every lad of a community in the world. To England, France, Germany, Italy, Switzerland, Holland, Denmark, Norway, Sweden, Austria, Israel, South America, North Africa, Australia, Canada, Mexico, and perhaps elsewhere as well. I wondered if my parents were now listening to the Rebbe. It was a suddenly warm feeling to think that the 3 of us might be listening to the Rebbe together. When the Rebbe was done talking, someone began a song. There was rhythmic singing. Little paper cups of vodka were held up to be blessed by a nod of the Rebbe's hand before being drunk. Then the signing stopped and the Rebbe spoke again about the importance of the sanctity of the Jewish family. There was more singing. I looked up at the benches behind the Rebbe and saw that Jacob Kahn was no longer there. Moments later I felt a tug at my sleeve. "Come outside with me, Asher," Jacob Kahn said. I followed behind him as he moved slowly through the dense crowd. Outside on the street, the air was cold and sharp, with the feeling of coming snow. We stood on the sidewalk away from the crowd, near the doors. There were 2 police cars at the curb and 4 patrolmen on the sidewalk in front of the building. 15 years ago there was nothing here, Jacob Kahn said, gazing at the synagogue and at the headquarters building alongside it. The house was here. I think a doctor or a dentist owned it. But none of this was here. He gestured toward the crowd. He's a good man, our Rebbe. He looked at me. I will not be going to Europe for a month. I was called 2 days ago, and thought I would tell you tonight rather than telephone. I leave tomorrow night. I shivered in the wind. In Zurich, they are planning a retrospective for a good friend. They are asking for advice. That will take a week. Then I will go to Italy. There is some marble I want to look at. I was quiet. Ashalev, it will only be for a month. Your world has not come to an end because Jacob Khan is going on a trip. You may use the studio any time you wish. There is a new piece of wood I brought in today you might want to use. I did not say anything. It is not in my nature to make long farewells. Goodbye, Ashalev. He shook my hand and walked away quickly beneath the winter trees. I did not go back inside. I walked home and went to bed. I took the subway to his studio the following Sunday afternoon, but I found the silent enormity of the room intolerable. After an hour, I closed it up and went home. I did not return to his studio. Instead, I worked in my attic room. I painted his swimming in the ocean. I painted him sculpting in the sand. I painted him walking with his wife. I painted the two of us painting together at the edge of the dunes. I painted him painting a huge canvas stripped to the waist. The room began to look cluttered with drawings and canvases. No, I would not need 5 years to fill this room. He returned in March, 1 month after he had gone. He called me. It had been a fine trip. Italy especially had been admirable. Italy was always admirable, especially Florence. I met your parents in Zurich. They are well and send you their love. You know they will be back for Passage. Will I see you Sunday? Yes. You will have to see Florence one day, Ashalev. There are people I will send you to. It is a gift, that city. I went to him the following Sunday. He looked well and was exuberant. I am always exuberant after Italy. It is not the marble. It is the marble. We worked together, and soon it was as if he had not been away at all. My parents arrived by ship on the last day of March. They moved into my uncle's house and lived in the room I had occupied before being transferred to the attic. My father looked rested. He had put on weight and had almost completely lost his limp. Looking at him during those weeks, I often wondered if I too would be grey in my early 40s. But he seemed once again strong, and it was clear that he had really needed my mother. We said very little to one another. He was uneasy in my presence. There was between us now a permanent high wall of uncertainty and hostility. My uncle made an effort to pierce that wall the first night my parents were back. He brought my father upstairs to the attic. I was at my desk reading. They stood in the doorway, looking around at the clutter of drawings and canvases. I left to buy him a house, my uncle said, speaking in Yiddish and chewing on a cigar. Look how he is filling the attic. My father's face was dark. I could see the anger in his eyes. You are encouraging him. He spoke as if I were not in the room. I am doing what I think is right. You give him money for his paint. I did not ask you to give him money. Oye, do you want your son to steal? My father looked at him. I could see his lips tighten beneath his graying beard. Listen to me, Listen to me, Oye. Listen to your brother. Reconcile yourself to your son. My father said nothing. He is a good boy. He cannot help what he does. Only an animal cannot help what he does. Are you? My father turned and went from the room. There was a heavy silence. My uncle sighed and shook his head. He is a stubborn man, your father. It is both a weakness and a strength to be so stubborn. Sometime during the intermediate days of Passover, I walked with my mother along the parkway near our apartment house. She looked young and lovely, but her eyes were sad. Jacob Khan told us in Zurich that you had a fine summer. Yes, he succeeded in angering your father. I was quiet. We walked beneath the trees. It is impossible to talk to your father about you. Hopelessly impossible. She looked at me and her eyes were moist. It hurts me to be caught between my husband and my son. I did not know what to say. We walked and came to the apartment house and stood on the street, looking up at the window of the living room. The Venetian blind had been raised. We could see the houses and the street reflected in the glass of the window. We think we may give up the apartment, my mother said. I don't know how long we'll be in Europe. It doesn't seem to make much sense to keep it. We turned and started back to my uncle's house. Asher, come with us to Europe. No. We miss you. I miss you. There are great art schools in Vienna. No. Asher, they'll try to take it away from me. No. She said. No. I said, no. All right, Asher. I'm worse than an animal. Asher, please. He won't take it away from me. All right. Hush, all right. She took my hand. I felt her slender fingers cool and strong against my skin. We walked back together beneath the young spring trees. My uncle urged them to not to give up the apartment. Had the Rebbe told my father his position in Europe was permanent? No, the Rebbe had not said that. Then they should keep the apartment. Did they know how difficult it was to acquire a rent-controlled apartment in these days? They left for Europe by ship in the third week of April, and I went back to Jacob Khan. Yes, Jacob Khan said when I told him of my parents' visit. I am afraid I've made an enemy of your father. Why does he hate me? I don't understand. He thinks you are wasting your life. He thinks you have betrayed him. It is not pleasant for a man like your father to feel his son to wait, what? Like your father to see his son painting nudes and the other things you paint. It is for him at best a frivolity and at worst a desecration. You and your father are two different natures. There is nothing to be done about it, Ashalev. The Rebbe isn't angry. Why isn't the Rebbe angry? The Rebbe is a very wise man, and he is of a different nature than your father. I don't understand. Do not try to understand. Become a great artist. That is the only way to justify what you are doing to everyone's life. I painted and studied it and brooded about my parents. Jacob Khan's words haunted me. That is the only way to justify what you are doing to everyone's life. I did not understand what he meant. I did not feel I had to justify anything. I had not willfully hurt anyone. What did I have to justify? I did not want to paint in order to justify anything. I wanted to paint because I wanted to paint. I wanted to paint the same way my father wanted to travel and work for the Rebbe. My father worked for Torah. I worked for what? How could I explain it? For beauty? No. Many of the pictures I painted were not beautiful. For what then? For a truth I did not know how to put into words. For a truth I could only bring to life by means of color and line and texture and form. And so I painted and studied and began once again to see my thunderous mythic ancestor. I saw other things as well. The prophylactic on the Provincetown beach, the nudes I had drawn and painted, the girls waiting along Manhattan side streets, certain books in stores, certain magazines on newsstands. I painted in a frenzy of fierce and restless energy, and slowly the room filled with my work. One day in June, I put a wet and finished canvas near my attic window. I looked outside and could not see the street for the thick new leaves of the tree. I spent that summer in Provincetown with Jacob and Tanya Khan. It was a calm and beautiful summer. I met some of his artist friends. They spent long nights talking. I sat and listened. I sat and listened the following summer too, and sometime toward the end of the summer I began to join in the talk. There were things I wanted to say. I said to them, and they sat and listened and we talked. Those were lovely summers. Only once in both summers did Jacob Khan indulge his illness, and then only briefly. My parents returned to America for the holidays after the last Provincetown summer. My mother began urging me to spend the following summer in Vienna, but I was afraid a summer in Vienna would extend itself into 1 or 2 years in Europe. I had come to enjoy living with my aunt and uncle and their noisy brood of children. I did not want to live with my father, so I refused. That was a bleak holiday for me. My aunt and uncle joined my mother in her insistence that I go to Vienna. My father remained aloof, not seeming to care whether I went or not. Jacob Khan was campaigning around the country for John Kennedy. Hitler had taught him to take an interest in politics. He had said to me after Kennedy's nomination, he was going to organize a nationwide artist for Kennedy group. People will listen to a 75-year-old man, he said. They will think I possess wisdom. I did not see him all during the campaign. I relented to their pleas. I would go to Vienna. You were right to do that, Jacob Khan said, when I saw him again after the election. Why? They are your parents. You should be with your parents. Why? He looked at me sharply. You do not want to go? No. Why did you agree? They all piled on me. You have been piled on before, Ashalev. I wish you had been around. Learn to stand on your own feet, Ashalev. Even if I live to 80, I will not be here forever. I don't want to live without my father. Then change your mind. I don't want to live with my father. Then change your mind. No. Then do something, but do not brood in my studio. Brood in your attic. Here we think and we work. We do not indulge ourselves in brooding. I'll brood in my algebra class. It's as good a place as any for brooding. Maybe I'll brood in my physics class. You are developing an interesting sense of humor, Ashalev. He said to me one day in December, I think John Kennedy will be a great president. I like the people he is surrounding himself with, but I was not interested in politics and cared little about Kennedy and his people. I shrugged and continued painting. He stood behind me one afternoon and watched me paint. He was silent a long time. Then he said, Ashalev, what are you doing? I explained it to him. He looked at me, then he looked at the canvas. Yes, he said very quietly, I understand. He went off to his own work. But from time to time, throughout the rest of that afternoon, I saw him glancing at me in a strange and curious way. The winter weeks passed with leaden heaviness. I did not want them to pass at all. I dreaded the oncoming summer. There was still coldness in the air, the first day of Passover. I spent all the intermediate days in galleries and museums. On one of those days, Jacob Khan accompanied me to the Museum of Modern Art, and I discovered something about two of the Picassos that I had not noticed on previous trips. I pointed it out to Jacob Khan, and he stared at the paintings and nodded slowly, gave me that strange and curious look again. Early one May afternoon, I took a subway to a Jewish museum in Manhattan. I saw Torah crowns, Torah pointers, Torah covers, spice boxes, illuminated manuscripts. Some were fine pieces of work, but there was no art. It was all crafts and unmoving. I felt vaguely betrayed. On the last Tuesday in June, my uncle drove me to Idlewild Airport and put me on a plane for Vienna. I became ill on the plane. I was ill during the stopover in London. I was ill on the flight from London to Vienna. In Vienna, I lay in a strange bed, in a strange room, and saw my mother's face through dark fog. Somewhere along the edge of the fog, I sensed my father's rage. I heard strange voices in languages I could not recognize. I heard Yiddish and French, and what sounded like Russian. Food poisoning, someone said. Virus, someone said. Nervous shock, someone said. I heard my father shouting. I sat in front of an open window that looked across a dark river, 2 old gabled buildings. It was raining. Rain came in the open window and collected the puddles on the wooden floor. I saw Udall Krinsky. What was Udall Krinsky doing in Vienna? Hello, Reb Udall Krinsky. Vienna is a city of waltzes and cafes. Udall Krinsky whispered. Vienna is a city that hates Jews. It rained on the river and the gabled houses. I saw sand and a vast ocean in the rain. I saw dunes and white sunlight on shingled houses. Someone had me by the arm. I heard my mother and father. There was a quarrel. It swirled poisonously around me. I felt his rage and hate. A man with a beard led me gently into a silver bird and sat with me through clouds. My uncle met me at the airport and took me home. It was the end of the 3rd week of July. I lay in bed 3 days, then began wandering around the house. I did a painting of the dark river in rain. In the 2nd week of August, my uncle put me on a bus to Provincetown. Jacob Kahn met me at the station. He looked bronze, and his hair and walrus mustache was sharply white in the brilliant sunlight. Well, I shall live, he said, gently. The climate of Vienna did not agree with you. Welcome. I went home with him. We painted and swam and walked in the surf. We looked at the hop of sunlight on the houses along the dunes. Tanya Khan showed me a small picture he had made in July and had bronzed by a caster outside of Wellfleet. It was a sculpture of me wearing shorts, a sports shirt, sandals, and my fisherman's cap. He had placed my side curls behind my ears. I missed you, Tanya Khan said. The registrar called me into his office. Ashalev, are you planning on going to college? Yes. To which college? Brooklyn. He adjusted the rim of spectacles on the bridge of his thin nose and peered at me. Your parents know of your plans? Yes. They approve? My mother approves. My mother wants me to go to college. He did not ask me about my father. Instead, he said, What will you study in college? I do not know. Whatever you study, one of your courses will be Russian. I looked at him. The Russian language. No, I said. The Rebbe has expressly asked. No. Do not be disrespectful, Ashalev. No, I said. No. He peered at me narrowly through the rim of spectacles. Very well. Good day, Ashalev. Outside on the street, the trees wore dead leaves. I shivered in the November wind. Rav Mendel Dorochov asked to see me. I climbed the stairway of the headquarters building late one evening and walked along the corridor to the waiting room. The room was empty, save for Rav Dorochov, who sat behind the desk, gaunt, dark-bearded. Sit down, Ashalev, he said. I took the chair he offered me. Your parents are well? My mother is well. He looked at me from behind his desk. After a moment, he said, Ashalev, are you going to college? Yes. Will you continue to attend the yeshiva while you're in college? Yes. Ashalev, we feel it will be of help if you study the Russian language in college. I am not interested in the Russian language. I do not care about the Russian language. Asher, remember to whom you are speaking. Leave me alone, I said. Asher, leave me alone. One is enough. Leave me alone, please. I am speaking for the Rebbe, Asher. Please, I said. Please, please, please. I was silent for a long time. He was silent for a long time. Then he dismissed me with an abrupt gesture of his hand. There was snow on the street. A bitter wind blew along the parkway. I was told that the Rebbe wanted to see me. I climbed the stairway on trembling legs and came into the waiting room. Rav Mindel Dorochov took me into the Rebbe's office and left, closing the heavy wooden door. The Rebbe sat behind his desk. He looked at me from across the room. He seemed garbed in light. Asher Lev, I heard him say softly. Come here, come here. I went up to him. I felt his eyes on my face. You look tired, my Asher. Sit here beside me, here. I sat in a chair alongside his desk. He gazed at me somberly. How are you feeling, Asher? I am well, Rebbe. How have you grown? How you have grown. And your beard. But you are thin. You are too thin. Jacob Kahn tells me you work very hard. I was quiet. He has been a good teacher? Yes. He is a good person. He is not an observer of the commandments. But he is a good person. I did not say anything. I hear from your parents that they are well. Yes. The letters from your mother. They are often sad. I was quiet. Asher, the Rebbe said softly, this world has not been kind to you. I sat very still. He shook his head slowly. Everything is in the hands of heaven except the fear of heaven, he quoted. What can I tell you, my Asher? I do not know what the Master of the Universe has waiting for us. Certain things are given, and it is for man to use them, to bring goodness into the world. The Master of the Universe gives us glimpses, only glimpses. It is us. It is for us to open our eyes wide. I was quiet. Asher Lev, my Asher Lev. Jacob Kahn tells me you have greatness. He tells me you will soon be ready to show yourself to the world. His words are for me a glimpse, a light. I say to myself, Asher Lev will be a great artist. He will travel about the world in search of ideas and people. Great artists make the entire world their home. You have already begun to travel, and I say to myself that there are great museums in Europe. There are great museums in Russia. You know of Hermitage in Leningrad and the museum in Moscow. Russia is a rich land in art, and you will one day wish to travel there. That is for me a glimpse, my Asher. I am trying to open my eyes wide and to see. I will tell you what my father, may he rest in peace, once told me. Seeds must be sown everywhere. Only some will bear fruit. But there will not be the fruit from the few had the many not been sown. Do you understand, my Asher? I nodded slowly. Yes, he said, I am certain you understand. I wish you a long and healthy life, my son. I give you my blessings for greatness in the world of art and greatness in the world of your people. I walked back to my uncle's house in the ice and snow of the January trees. That spring I flew to Chicago with Jacob Kahn to see a Brancusi exhibit at the Art Institute. That summer I drove to Provincetown with Jacob and Tommy Kahn and lived in my world of water and sand. That fall I entered college and registered for a class in Russian. I painted. I attended college and studied Russian. I attended the yeshiva and studied Gemara and Hasidus. I traveled to Manhattan galleries and saw the beginnings of a mocking art which I disliked. Jacob Kahn called it nihilism. He despised it. He regarded it as an undisciplined destruction of aesthetic values. Duchamp was to blame for this, he said bitterly. I began to understand what it meant to have once been a revolutionary in art and then to become, in turn, the target of a new revolution. Sometimes I think it is not wise to grow too old, Jacob Kahn said to me one windy afternoon as we walked together along Madison Avenue, but I am not aware that we are given a choice in this matter. He brought me into Anna Schaefer's gallery. She was behind a desk and she smiled delightedly when she saw us. My young prodigy and my impossible old man, she said, taking my hand. Jacob Kahn kissed her cheek. There were paintings on the walls. The forms and muted colours intrigued me. He is a splendid painter, Anna Schaefer said to me. A Viennese. He loves to paint chairs. He is another of my impossible old men. Go and look at them. I wandered through the gallery. Anna Schaefer and Jacob Kahn were talking quietly. I came back to them. He's very good, I said. Yes, Anna Schaefer said, and he sells well. I knew him in Paris, Jacob Kahn said. He sold well in Paris, too. That is where your pictures will hang in the spring, Anna Schaefer said to me, pointing to the walls. I stared at her and felt a shock move through me. I would have done it this year, she said, but this old man would not let me. He is still a boy this year, Jacob Kahn said. A boy should not rush to make his soul naked. I think you'll be the youngest artist ever to have a one-man show in a Madison Avenue gallery, Anna Schaefer said. I may bill you as Asher Lev, Brooklyn Prodigy. She laughed softly. Look at his face, Jacob. I am looking. I would like to sculpt that expression, but I do not happen to be carrying a block of marble on me. Outside, we walked together on the windy street. You are happy, yes, Jacob Kahn said. I nodded and did not know what to say. Be happy, he said. Be happy. These are good times. Be happy, Asher Lev. Later you will understand how truly good these times have been. My uncle and aunt were delighted when I told them. Udo Krinsky was delighted. The colors you paint with you bought here, yes? I am happy for you, Asher Lev. I wrote my mother. She wrote me back saying she was very happy. Yes, she had informed my father. They would probably return from Europe sometime during the summer, she wrote. My father's work was coming to an end. Would I inform my aunt and uncle? And would I ask them to inform the tenants in the apartment? I lived that year in a fever of expectation. The winter seemed unusually mild. Jacob Kahn came to the house one day and, from the stacks of canvases piled against the walls, selected the ones for the show. It would take your uncle 5 years to scrape the paint from your room, he said. You have learned all my bad habits. He looked at me. Yes, we will show the two nudes at Asher Lev. They are important to your development. We are not playing games. You will enter in truth, or you will not enter at all. A truck came one afternoon while I was in school and took away the paintings he had chosen. The weeks went by. One April afternoon, I came into Anna Schaefer's gallery and watched as they put up the paintings. I did not like how some of the canvases had been hung. Artists should paint and not hang, Anna Schaefer said. Your colleagues have destroyed the frame, and soon they will destroy the wall. Go away, Asher Lev. Go home and paint. I was hanging canvases before you were born. I walked the wind-burned streets of Manhattan. She had said, your colleagues. I walked the streets and tasted the golden sun that lay across the city. To this day, I do not know all the details that went into preparation of that show. Anna Schaefer sent out the announcements, contacted some of her collectors privately, and prepared the catalogue. A week before the opening, I learned that it had all amounted to a great deal of money. Who is paying for it? I asked Jacob Khan. You are. I stared at him. She will take it from your sales. She has a great affection for you, but she is a businesswoman. Does she also get a percentage of each sale? 30%. Do not look at me like that. What do you think she means when she talks about becoming rich off your work? She has become rich off mine. But we are fortunate. Some galleries take 40 and 50%. What if I don't sell? She is gambling. Gamblers sometimes lose. She did not lose, but she did not win either. The opening was a moderate success. Some of her collectors came. Some of my classmates came. Some critics came. Udo Krinsky came. Rav Mendel Dorochov came, looked, and walked out. My uncle and aunt were there. People sauntered in off the streets. It was a warm day in early May, and the streets were crowded. There were drinks and food, non-kosher food. She was in the art business, not in the religious catering business, Anna Schaefer had said. This was not a bar mitzvah, but an art show. I did not eat. The sharpest memory I have of that show, a memory that was reinforced by the 2 other shows she gave me before I left for Europe, and that returns to haunt me more and more frequently these days, is the memory of standing in that gallery and seeing the faces of my world on its walls. Paintings of my people on my street, paintings of my mother and me walking together, paintings of Udo Krinsky and Mrs. Rackover, paintings of old ladies on the parkway benches, all the years of my life summed up on the walls of a gallery, and then seeing some of the empty spaces when the show was over. Udo Krinsky was gone. Mrs. Rackover was gone. My mother and I were gone. Some of the old ladies on the park benches were gone. We are not rich, Anna Schaefer said to me when it was done and the walls were bare. But we are not poor either. The critics were kind. The critics who had noticed me had commented on my extreme youth and been very kind, with the exception of one who dismissed me as a fraud and described me as glutted with banality, sentimentality, and a menacing affinity for Picassoid forms. Jacob Kahn liked that phrase. He went around quoting it for weeks. Anna, did you know our prodigy has a menacing affinity for Picassoid forms? Anna Schaefer was not amused. I wrote my mother about the show. She wrote me back expressing her joy. They were not returned that summer, she added. My father's work was not done yet. She asked me to call the tenants in the apartment and inform them that they would not have to move out. I spent the summer in Provincetown with Jacob and Tanya Khan. Jacob Khan was in Paris, visiting a retrospective given for an old friend from his Berlin days when President Kennedy was assassinated. He returned to America a few days after the funeral, locked himself in his studio, and painted. I saw the canvas when it was done. It radiated his anguish. He said to me once during those days of pain, "This will be a new dark age." I remember Germany, but where can I run to now? I think I will not enjoy reaching 80. Later, Tanya Khan called and said she was not well. Yes, he was indulging himself again. No, she had no idea how long it would last. It took almost a week. When I saw him again, he would not talk about it. My second show took place the following spring. The critics were very kind, except for a friend of the Picassoid forms, who had other things to say this time. We are not rich yet, Anna Schaefer said, but I am beginning to feel optimistic. You are a greedy old woman, Jacob Kahn said. A greedy rich old woman, Anna Schaefer said. In July, I went with Jacob and Tanya Khan to Provincetown. My parents returned from Europe in the middle of August. My father's work was done. He had been reassigned to an office next to Rav Mendel Dorochov on the second floor of the Landover building. My parents moved back into our old apartment, and when I returned from Provincetown, I moved into my old room. I could not paint in that room because it was too small. There was a brief family meeting with my aunt and uncle and my parents. My father's suggestion resolved the difficulty. I lived with my parents and painted in my uncle's house.